Hey everyone, welcome back to All Things Private Practice. I'm joined today by a good friend who lives in Asheville with me, Hillary Logan, who is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of trainers, MINT, since 2011. She's a licensed clinical social worker and addiction therapist. Literally has been working as a helping professional for 20 years. And you created the MI Center for Change. I don't even know why that's not in your bio. That's why I was so confused by your bio. I was like, what is happening here? We have so many people on here who just don't want to talk about their creations and accomplishments. We probably need to unpack that at some point. Wow, my hair looks insane. I've been like letting it grow out, waiting for a haircut before going viral, and I'm just like, geez Louise. Okay, so round two, because you had come on here last year, maybe even longer at this point, and just the audio wasn't working well, so glad to have you back. Sorry it took so long to happen, but I think it's a good time.
Yeah, we've had a few things happen since then.
Yeah, we've had a few things happening since then. And because you do specialize in motivational interviewing and how it's applicable in so many different areas of our life, I think it's really a great time to talk about how we can use MI for hope. That was your idea. I really liked it, because what's happening in our country right now certainly doesn't create a lot of room for that at the moment. And you and I both lived through Hurricane Helene here too. So there's been a lot of stuff happening over the last couple of months.
So much. And that's really in October, a few weeks, maybe close to a month after Helene, I was flying to give a training in Boston. So I was leaving Asheville, which had been devastated by Helene. And I was in the airplane taking off with a book that Bill Miller had written recently called Hope, 8 Ways to Hope. And Bill Miller, for those that don't know, is one of the co-creators of Motivational Interviewing. And he's done a bunch of research about how important hope is for us to have hope in our clients, for us to have hope in our lives and in our futures. And so I was reading this book as the plane took off, and I felt this loosening in my chest that happened, this somatic experience of like, okay, I not only had to leave Asheville, I needed to feel like my body was safe again. And also I needed the message of hope at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great little like introduction into this. I did the exact opposite post Helene, where I idiotically decided I needed to leave for a lot of reasons and went to St. Pete, Florida, where my dad lives, which also got wrecked by Helene plus Milton, and got down there and was like, this is not what my body or my mental state needs right now.
Yeah.
And then I got on another plane and flew to Key West because I was like, this will make me feel better. I'll be in Key West. And then it was like 1 week post-election results. And I was like, what am I doing to myself?
Right.
What am I doing to myself?
Well, you were trying to find some territory that was going to make you feel better. And, and that's something I think we're all trying to orient ourselves to over and over again every day, is like, how can I help myself feel better based off of what's happening around me, what's happening inside of me?
Yeah. That's very true. I was trying. I just was not making good, healthy, rational decisions in those moments. Okay. So with that statement, we're just trying. We're trying to make ourselves feel better. We're trying to make sense of what's happening, not only to me, but around me. So tell us, like, okay, contextually, when I think of motivational interviewing, from my work experience, it was always geared towards like stages of change, and specifically with substance use and addiction. So to apply it in so many different arenas, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening who are clinicians are like, wait, I thought this was only for like pre-contemplative people or people who are in, the prepared stage or whatever. So give us context in terms of like, it's so much more than that.
It is. Motivational interviewing is so much more than that. And because it's been around for 4 decades, since the early 80s, and because it was born in addiction, it's often associated with addiction and with the stages of change, which is kind of not MI, but they actually came out around the same time and they can be used really complementary. But MI at this stage is more broadly a way of talking with people about change and growth that helps them strengthen their own motivation and commitment to the change and growth that they want to make. And so specifically today, I know we were going to talk some about how we can use motivational interviewing to support our own change and growth.
Yep.
And then again, more broadly, MI is now in so many disciplines and fields. There are more applications than we could cover in a podcast.
Totally. Totally. So I love setting the stage that way. So tell us about it right now, this day and age. We are at March 5th. This won't get released for a couple months. So those of you listening are going to be like, when was this recorded? So today's March 5th. We have a lot going on around us, happening on a moment by moment basis, it often feels like. And I think it's intentional so that we do feel demoralized and confused and chaotic and overwhelmed and hopeless. I think the goal is to create collective shared hopelessness. So holding on to that hope or that ability to remain somewhat optimistic, even if it's in very small doses, is so unbelievably important. So can you talk to us a little bit about how do we cultivate that and what does that look like right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It remains hard for us to orient every day to the resources and things that are going to help us stay grounded and clear-headed and continue moving forward. You know, it's really quite challenging to do those things right now. So I think where this relates to motivational interviewing for me is this opportunity for us to reground into the spirit elements of motivational interviewing. And spirit in MI means heart, set, and mindset, really. And so it's regrounding in these beliefs, this heart, set, and mindset of these 4 elements, which is compassion, acceptance, empowerment, and partnership. And so we can explore these together a little bit today, like what that looks like as applied to self-change and self-grounding. And I figured we might start with like kind of the compassion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Take us away.
Self-compassion, like as a starting point, like to take a breath and invite ourselves into some self-compassion for how hard this is right now, how scary, alarming. Like we are suffering individually and collectively. Our clients are suffering. Yeah. This is hard. So some of like what the mindfulness, Buddhist, and self-compassion practices invite us into is like a mindfulness moment around that self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that can be really hard for people to access. So if we start with self-compassion and we try really hard to just even allow 1% of it in, and we try really hard to give ourselves a little bit of a break we could feel like we're not doing enough, we're not saying enough, we're not advocating enough, we're not informed enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, you do also have to truly protect yourself, your energy, your capacity, your limitations, and to give yourself permission.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that there can be action steps that come out of that. You know, if we need more space for self-compassion, like what boundaries might need to be set for that? What are action steps that we might want to take for that? But really, one of the things I love about motivational interviewing is it's not prescriptive.
Right.
We are never telling people what to do if we're in motivational interviewing mode. So we come back to what do you need in this moment and eliciting that. And so for listeners, if we're inviting you into some self-compassion, what do you need to bring yourself more into that self-compassion? And that's going to be different for every single listener that it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point. Kind of allows for a little bit more looseness and like, okay, it doesn't have to look a certain way. I don't have to show up a certain way. And I think that like come as you are mentality and just show up as you are, and to be able to really check in with yourself and do that inventory when you're able to, because I think that's really, really a good foundational starting point. So if we start there, then what comes next? Where are we going from?
Yeah. So starting with that, compassion, maybe today I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And then moving into acceptance, which is another element of the spirit of MI.
Yeah.
So self-acceptance.
Sure. So not acceptance of like, hey, I accept what's happening around me and in the world. I feel really accepting and good about that. It's more about I'm accepting myself. I'm accepting how I'm experiencing things. I'm accepting how I'm showing up.
Yes, I am accepting that this is where I'm at today. Maybe today's the day that I have energy to call my congresspeople and go volunteer or et cetera. And maybe today is the day that I don't. And can I, and this is where these two blend, right? Self-compassion and self-acceptance is, can I today be where I'm at? Big breath.
Yeah. And y'all can do this along at home as you're listening. Unless you're driving down the interstate, maybe table this until later.
Some gentleness, like inviting in gentleness with yourself, awareness, tenderness. I know that you're also a fan of IFS or internal family systems. And so like thinking about the parts of us that can be hard on ourselves or, drive us to go or do. And, kind of the paradox of change is often that we have to start with acceptance.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yep. Because right now, there can be parts that show up, right, that say all of these negative things about how we are experiencing, reacting, moving through, not doing enough, etc. So just allowing for that acceptance that those can exist too. And they don't have to steer the ship, so to speak, but they can still simultaneously exist and coincide next to us. So, okay. So we have self-compassion, acceptance.
Yeah. And then empowerment is a third element of the spirit of MI. And so the questions here for me are really like, what empowers you into what it is that you need? Whether that's stillness or action. Who are you? What do you have to bring to the table? And when are the right times to do that?
Right. Saw this a lot during the hurricane here in Appalachia, where people were in action mode all the time. The first week, a lot of people were in like, I've got to be in action and I've got to help the community. I've got to show up. I've got to collect resources. I've got to do all the things. And inevitably and understandably immediately led to intense crash, burnout, apathy, removal. So really honoring like, when do I have the energy? When do I feel empowered to act? When do I feel empowered to rest? When do I feel empowered to turn my phone off and get off of fucking social media? I started this habit a couple of years ago as my audience got bigger and messages increased. I noticed like this, there's if we're looking at it from an IFS lens, there's an ego state to like building audience too. It's like, oh my God, look at all these people who follow my stuff. So having to put my phone in a different room every night, starting at 5 p.m. and not looking at it at all has been unbelievably helpful for my mental state. So when do I feel empowered to step away from that? When do I feel empowered to give myself permission to break that rule? As an autistic person, the black and white rule setting that I set for myself sometimes has to get a little gray.
Yeah. Empower into flexibility.
Empower into less rigidity. So empowerment. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen this like, as I've been tracking myself in this political climate and post-Tulane and on is thinking like, what are there boundaries I need to set?
Yeah.
With people, like I noticed over the last couple of weeks when I would see friends or be messaging with friends, suddenly the onslaught of, did you hear this is happening? And he's doing this and this is, that it feels to me like I'm getting hit with shrapnel.
Yeah.
And so I empowered myself to ask loved ones, like, please don't tell me the news right now. I need to choose when to approach the news, when I'm resourced in enough for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one that's applicable for a lot of people, myself included, because I think you can almost shame yourself or shame other people of like, you're not as informed, you're not paying attention all the time. And then it's like, in reality, what is paying attention all the time going to do? You can get the cliff notes at the end of the day from trusted sources or at the end of the week. Super important, because it really is easy to get really sucked in and have that consume. Whether we want to call it doom scrolling, whether we want to call it hyper focus, whatever is happening, but really truly impactful. So I like that. Setting that boundary is important for sure. I'm going to Ireland for my retreat on Sunday, and one of my speakers and close friends, he and I are in a similar headspace with everything and very outspoken. And I said, when we're in Ireland, can we just be in Ireland? Yeah. Just like not talk about all of the things that are consuming our lives and our mental states, because like you need a reprieve, you need a break, you need to have moments of hope and optimism and joy.
Yes.
Without constantly feeling 24/7 existential dread.
Yeah, we got to fill up the gas tank before we drive, and in order to drive, and that metaphor might be a little painful for those of us in Nashville when the gas, the hurricane hit, we had no gas. Is like, right, literally the metaphor. We do have to juice ourselves up. This is a long game that we're in, and so listeners can consider what juices me up. Like, what is it that's going to fill me, and what action steps do I actually need to do to support that? And it may change day by day. I tend towards some rigid thinking too. So I create a rule for myself, like, I'm going to do this every day. And then I don't, and then I fail and beat up on myself. So then I lose the self-compassion and self-acceptance, and that's not helpful either. But like, what about today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And motivational interviewing, has specific strategies that help us anchor into our why change and how change, specific to us. And so if as a result of listening today, you're like, oh, I need to set that boundary with this person, or I need to fill in the blank, then MI is so potent because it first anchors us into, why is this important to me? Why is it, like, based off of you and your values and your needs in this moment? And then how are you as an individual going to do that? Like, this empowers each individual to make their own decisions about what they need to do in the ways that they need to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's really important and very individualistic, which I like, because not everyone's situation is going to be the same. Best, so we go through empowerment. Where do we end up?
The fourth of the elements, spirit elements of MI, is partnership. And when we apply this, like in help as a helping professional with clients, what we're doing there is we're acknowledging, I'm not an expert in your life. You have expertise in your life. I have some expertise too. Together, partnering, let's see what can be done to make the change that you want to make.
Right.
When I think about this partnership spirit element for self-change, I actually think a bit more about like the IFS model stuff. Is like, if I've got my big self energy inside of me, that like wisdom, compassion, calm, courage, curiosity, all those C words, then how do I partner and connect with the parts of me inside to bring that hope, peace, wisdom, connectivity, like into my internal system?
Right. Yeah, I like that. So partnering with others, partnering with what's inside of you, the combination of the two. I think partnership is so crucial. I think community connection is really crucial right now. And obviously, if you're working with clients, partnership is important too. But in the scope of this conversation, I think feeling connected to some semblance of community is super important right now and very, very crucial. It's vital to like the survival in general. I keep talking about Helene, keep talking about what's happening politically right now without actually naming it. for a lot of reasons. I saw the community really come together here during and post Khalid. It was amazing to watch, like, people in partnership, people supporting, people like going out of their way for each other because of a disaster.
Yes.
Kind of in like a disaster right now, in a different sense of the word. So having to support each other, having to protect each other, having to rely on each other, but then also having to look inwards and really connect with some of the strengths and assets that you have and the resilience that you have in order to move forward as well.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I have like kind of two memories that come to mind as we're talking about partnership. One is the post Helene. I looked outside of my house one day and I saw across the street about 20 neighbors gathered around a radio. And they had figured out, like, it was potluck because everybody's electricity had been out. We were losing all our food in our freezers. And, you know, one person in the neighborhood had a radio, so we could hear those twice a day radio broadcasts and all this stuff. You know, and the sense, again, like the somatic body shift of like, I am in community, and because I'm in community, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. I think for us, the thing that I think about is like everyone being on the same page, because at first you're so disoriented and confused of like, what is happening? This feels chaotic. I don't have any of the information. Walk down the street, there's people gathering, trying to find cell phone service, holding their phone in the air, like looking around
to get information,
to get said information. But in reality, acknowledging that nobody had said information and everybody was in the same boat. It was like, this is still scary, but it makes it a little bit more comforting to know that it's not just like me who is experiencing this disorientation, confusion, and chaos. So there's almost like this collective, I hate to say trauma bonding, but I mean, certainly trauma bonding in regards to any sort of emergency situation.
Yeah. And you said disorientation, confusion, and chaos. And so what does it take for us to flip those, to get oriented, to be less confused, and to quiet the internal chaos? And all of this is back to like these grounding like pieces. What grounding, what boundaries, what actions did people need to do to get there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we're coming to the final minutes of this conversation, you've just laid out a pretty simplistic roadmap of how you can really start implementing these things on a daily basis, and sometimes when you need it, moment by moment basis. So any suggestions, strategies, words of wisdom that you want to leave the audience with as we get ready to wrap up?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I love about motivational interviewing is that it's very strengths-based, and it really works first and foremost to acknowledge what we're already doing and then to grow it from there. And so considering what you're already doing to support yourself right now.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that, affirming that, like soaking that in, and then asking yourself, what could I do a little bit more of?
For sure. Yeah. I like that. It's a really, really nice, easy way to kind of absorb that. So I like that it's strengths-based. I like that it's like, this is just meeting you where you are, that it's very individualized. So, you know, this isn't something that we think about very often right now. And I think that it's also important to acknowledge, again, going back to myths and misconceptions about motivational interviewing, that is obviously not just for substance use and addiction treatment. So really just cool conversation. I know you have so many resources for MI. I know you have a course on motivational interviewing for hope, which is kind of the crux of what we're talking about right now. A ton of free resources. So yeah, share anything you want with the audience of where they can find those things. And we'll link that in the show notes too for everyone, so you have easy access to all of Hillary's information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And to everybody listening, thank you for the work you do. You are fighting the good fight, trying to do the good work in your communities. So take a moment and acknowledge, you, and even just listening to this podcast today, you're trying to work on you. You're trying to resource into you. So thank you for that. Yeah, My Center for Change has a lot of free resources. We have a free resource page. People log in to that. We have a free learning library that has tons of resources, values card sorts, downloads on MI, videos, etc. We have a free 1-hour webinar, which comes with continuing education, free CE for those listening to Dave. Lots of CE approval boards, but that's how Dr. Bill Miller speaks for 1 hour on hope. And it was so refreshing for me to think about the different facets of hope and how we can choose to hope in different ways on different days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So lots of ways, lots of resources online there. And what else?
That's probably.
Yeah. That's a wrap. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of that will be in the show notes, so all the links and information, so you'll have access to that. Thank you so much for coming on and making the time and just being an awesome human being. Really appreciate the fact that you've checked in on me over the last couple of years about my throat situation. And that's been really meaningful to me as well. So
yeah,
really glad we finally got to reconnect like this.
Absolutely. Voice is important. And here we are, like, trying to amplify voices into the ethers to help support people in the work that they do and hoping and supporting yourselves.
Absolutely.
So we can keep changing the world.
100%. To everyone listening to All Things Private Practice, new episodes are out on Saturdays on all major platforms and YouTube. Make sure to like, download, subscribe, and share. And doubt yourself, do it anyway. We will see you next week.